Francisco. The narrator in The Iron Heel tells a riveting tale about dictatorship from her secret hideout in Sonoma. The Valley of the Moon follows the journey of an Oakland wife and husband as they travel from the East Bay to Carmel and then to Glen, where they buy land and settle down. London couldn't write without, in some way, bringing California and Californians into his story. Granted, beginning in his teens and then all through his life, he traveled widely and wrote about Mexico, England, Hawaii, Japan, and Korea, where he served as a war correspondent for the San Francisco Examiner. His wanderlust took him from home, but there was no way that travel could ever remove home from his heart. London identified with California and thought of himself as a Californian, while East Coast publishers and editors often labeled him a California outdoorsman who played as hard as he worked, rode horseback, boxed, and often composed his books in the open air year-round. You can't do that in Boston. To describe London as a Bay Area writer isn't meant as a slap in the face. Readers usually depict William Faulkner as a Southern writer. And we think of Emily Dickinson as a New Englander. In their own localities, both Faulkner and Dickinson tapped into the universal and the cosmic. So did London. Now, on the 100th anniversary of death, we might remember his many ties to the Golden State. I can think of some of them off the top of my head. He learned to love drink at Johnny Heinhold's Last Chance Saloon in Oakland, and he learned to love books at the Free Public Library, also in Oakland. He met both of his wives in the Bay Area, and both times he married California women. He ran unsuccessfully twice for mayor in Oakland, and as a cub reporter worked for William Randolph Hearst at the San Francisco Examiner. Moreover, he attended UC Berkeley, I'll bet only for a semester, and yet always cheered Cal against Stanford in the big game. He also photographed and described in words the 1906 earthquake and fire. He sold his novels to Hollywood when Hollywood was just getting off the ground, and he went to Los Angeles frequently to negotiate movie deals and stop movie producers from making films based on his books without getting his permission. One of his best short stories, South of the Slot, is set in the Bay Area. It's about a man who lives a double life, part of the time as a Berkeley professor engaged to a socialite, and part of the time as a union man with a union woman for a girlfriend. That story suggests some of the dualities in the Bay Area, and also suggests that London thought of himself as a man pulled in different directions, toward academia and the life of the intellectual, and toward trade unions and the life of the working class. On the 100th anniversary of his death, we might think of London as one of the great grandfathers of 20th century California literature. Jack London set the stage for Jack Kerouac, who came to California to experience the kind of adventures that took London to the edge of the map and back. Then, too, contemporary women writers like Cheryl Strayed, the author of Wild, looked like the literary great-granddaughters of the myth maker who reinvented the wild in his breakthrough novel, The Call of the Wild, that still calls to Californians and to the soul of California that lives in readers everywhere. Last week, when I talked about London at the library on West Napa, there was lively discussion and commentary. One person said that Jack London's life didn't matter, but that his books did. I tried to point out that much of London's work was derived from his own life, and that, as the American literary critic Alfred Kazin once observed, the greatest book that London wrote was his own life. Besides, people want to hear about London's life. They don't just want to hear plot summaries of his novels. Another person at the library said that she had started to read London's Martin Eden a week earlier, couldn't stomach it, and tossed it across the room. I think I nodded my head. I know that I explained there have been times in my life when I have picked up a London book and read it all the way through, and at other times when I couldn't get past the first paragraph. This isn't a dictatorship. No one is forced to read Jack London. I'm not putting a gun to anyone's head and saying you must read The Call of the Wild, Martin Eden, The Iron Heel, or you're done for it. I do think that if you're a Californian and you want to understand the history and the culture of this place, it helps to know about Jack London and to read some of his works. Thank you very much.
That was good.
Okay.
So we have time for questions, if anybody has any probing questions for Dr. Raskin. Obviously, this stuff didn't come to the page without doing a lot of research, so. Ann?
Well, I have a lot of questions, but number one, is it true, like Jack London wrote great books, and then he wrote books just to pay his bills? Can you
Right.
talk about that a little bit?
Well,
Is that
gosh.
wrong?
No, that is absolutely right. He was aware of it himself. He said, I'm writing books for the ages that I hope are going to last and they're going to become classics, and I'm writing books just so that I can pay the rent or buy more land. I mean, he once said, you know, what I want money, but I want money so that I can buy things. I mean, he started buying 135 acres. He ended up with 1,000 acres. It cost him in 1913 $75,000 to build Wolf House. He spent a huge amount of money on the Snark. He had a telephone in his place, in his cottage. He had his own telegraph machine. He had a gramophone. He had a dictaphone. He had his own fire engine, which didn't help him. He had workers from Italy who were doing the stonework. The guy was spending a lot of money. He was the major employer in Glen Ellen at his time, you know.
So how does that track with his socialist? Like he was kind of a capitalist and a socialist.
Yes, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah, he was. You know, somebody pointed out, not me, but somebody pointed out, here was this guy who was always saying, you know, people are in a capitalist society, people are slaves to their work. They just work and their bills and around and around. But he did the same thing to himself. You know, he was a traveler, an adventurer, but he took his typewriter and his wife with him every place he went, and he wrote Martin Eden when he was sailing across the Pacific. So, in John Barleycorn, he says, "I'm afraid I always was an extremist." And I know people who say, "What do you mean? He was a moderate. He did everything." He did everything in moderation. A guy who's writing 50 books in 16 years is not living a sort of a very easy life. Then he's also drinking more than he should, even after his doctors tell him not to drink. He's smoking cigarettes. He's eating raw duck. I've often thought if I was alive, he'd like for half-cooked duck. You know, if I was alive back in those days, I'd say, Jack, can you slow down, please? Can you take it easy? Can you think of a long life? That was not him. That was not the way he saw his life. He was ready to burn himself up. The guy had contradictions. He was this and he was that. Was he aware of it? I don't know if he was aware of it. There's, you know, how could some people say, well, how could you, you know, he was a socialist. near the end of his life, he wanted everybody who was at Beauty Ranch to have a piece of land and to build a cottage and to have a community school. He was in favor of World War I. He said, every so often we need to have a bloodletting. And
That's true.
So when he died, you couldn't tell the 7 or 8-year-old what caused his death, but what do you think caused his death? Alcoholism?
I think there was a lot of contributing factors. The guy was really had all kinds of sicknesses and all kinds of illnesses. His kidneys were failing him. He was taking morphine and heroin prescribed by his doctors, and he had 4 doctors. He was taking those painkillers. I think it's very likely that he took an overdose, that he was so high and he didn't know what he was doing, and then they couldn't revive him. They tried to revive him. They walked him around, and he was gone.
And what about the cause of the fire?
Well, Jack and Charmian always suspected that it was arson. 75 years afterwards, the park hired some forensic experts to come up and do an investigation, and they said it was spontaneous combustion.
From the oils.
Right.
Some workers threw these rags in the corner, and it was a hot day, and it was over 102, and they caught fire. Well, a guy got in touch with me 2 weeks ago. He said, I think we should reopen the fire. I checked the weather that day. It was 80 degrees. It was not 102. I've done research about what the workers were using to rub down, the redwood. It wasn't linseed oil. This is what the thing. My booklet is called "The Mysteries of Jack London." The 3 things we'll never know final answers about: who was his father, and how did he feel about his parents and growing up? Who started the fire, if anybody did, and how did he actually die? The guy is.
Well, there's a question about that, Dr. Raskin,
Sir.
that I've heard about as a physician. I heard that when he went overseas to the Pacific,
Yes.
that they got, unfortunately, a venereal disease, syphilis. And
Yes.
so what he did, he gave all the people on the boat, all his mates, etc., just the regular dose. But he decided he'd take a double dose.
Yeah.
So he got mercury poisoning.
Yes,
to the
mercury
kidneys.
poisoning.
So
Yes.
the kidneys shut down. When the kidneys shut down, your potassium rises, your heart stops, and that's the end.
That is impossible. So I have asked people about this.
Mhm.
They said, well, was there an autopsy? There was no autopsy done. They said if there's no autopsy, you
Can't
cannot know for absolute certain. Also, right away, his body was cremated, and so you can't do anything after that. So, and some people say certain people didn't want an investigation, and so they did this
go.
right away.
Sure.
All
Without
these
an
things.
autopsy, you can't tell. We as physicians can't tell.
Right.
But I can just tell you that with chronic kidney disease, and especially mercury poisoning,
Yeah.
there is a very high possibility you will die from that. I would say
Yes.
almost 90%.
Yes.
The mercury will also cause so much pain that
Right.
the morphine and also the Demerol and the codeine and everything else that you happen to use,
Yes.
you need. And of course, that can occur. If you get too much, you overdose yourself, and then you die from both the complications,
Yeah.
respiratory distress as well as kidney failure.
Well, the first doctor who showed up at Beauty Ranch found some empty vials of morphine on the floor.
Okay.
And by the time, then the second doctor came and said, oh, he's been my patient for 3 years and I've been treating him for kidney failure. So,
Right.
because the first doctor thought it was an overdose of morphine. The other
Sure.
guy said, no, it's kidney failure.
Combination.
Uremic poisoning, I think they put on the death certificate.
Yeah, that's kidney failure.
Yeah. So.